Welcome to video 31. This is the third in the Subprograms playlist, and in this video we are looking at using subprograms with Python lists. So the purpose for this video is to understand how you can pass multiple values to a subprogram as a single variable, and likewise to return multiple values assigned to a single variable as well. Also to revisit and use input split as a single line input from the user, and then to be able to unpack a list in order to assign individual values to variables. No theory in this video, guys, this is just a Python demo. Just a reminder also that in the Monster Resources Schoology folder there are now two PDFs. The first one categorizes the videos under their playlists and also recommends any Python book or booklets that would be useful for that particular topic represented by the playlist, and the other PDF is a more detailed view of each of the videos in sequence order. Okay, let's crack on and do a Python demo. So guys, details of our demo is on the screen. This is an example of using lists and programs together. So we will be passing in a list and then returning back a list to the main program as well. The program takes user input as a maths expression, so this is literally what the user types in on one line, and then the subprogram will calculate and return three values: the original value, a value rounded to 2 decimal places, and an integer version, which is the number rounded up to the nearest whole number. So we will be defining a single subprogram called calculator, which will be a function. Calculator has one parameter, input parameter, which is the expression from the user, and will return a single variable, but that variable will be assigned a list, and the list will contain those 3 different versions of the calculation. Okay, so let's crack on with this then. Let's get some code down. Okay, so let's define our calculator subprogram. So this will be a function. So we want to say def calculator, and then it's going to have one parameter which we will call expression. Okay, and then colon, and then of course our indentation. Now the first thing we need to do, guys, and this should be something you're familiar with either from doing lists in class or going through previous videos, we're going to unpack our list, okay, because we're going to send the subprogram a list as its input parameter. So we want to say, let's put a comment in unpack the list. The list, guys, will have those 3 components of the expression, so the number followed by the operator followed by the second number. Okay, so unpack the list then, and we want to assign some individual variables on a single line. So we will say num1, which will be the first number, and we will define a variable called operator. That will be our operator symbol, and then num2 will be our second number in the expression, and that simply equals the expression value that we passed over. Okay, so that should unpack our list for us, so we can now start to do some maths with our individual variables. The first thing that we need to do, guys, is to convert the strings to floats, because these are unpacked as string data types. So we want the floats equivalent, so I'm going to say num1 comma num2. Okay, and both of those become the float equivalents, so we want to say float of num1 and comma float of num2. So we're doing same line assignments as well, okay, but of a different type. So num1 and num2 become float of num1, and then of course float of num2 as well. Okay, and we need to check for user input error, and the bit we're going to check for is the operator. Okay, we're not going to do any more validation than that. We're not going to check for alpha characters or anything like that. This will suffice. So we'll say if operator, okay, not in, so it's a negative check again, or a negative test, and then we want the string version of the 4 operators that we're expecting. So that will be plus. Okay, so we're expecting these to be in the expression that was typed in by the user. So plus, then we want minus, and then obviously, guys, we're expecting a big capital X, okay, to represent times, and then we don't have on the keyboard an equivalent of the divide symbol. So we're going to just stick with our traditional programming version of the slash. Okay, that will suffice. So if it's not in that, we want to return -1. Okay, just like we did in the previous video. We're going to use -1 as an error code, if you like. Then obviously else will be us calculating on the basis of a correct input from the user. So we want to say if, and then operator equates to, and our first one, let's do plus. All right, so now obviously we're going to want to add these numbers together. Okay, so we will say result equals num1 plus num2. So I'm not going to do multiple returns in this one, guys. I'm going to use variables. Okay, so result equals that, and then we will say elif. Okay, and then we're going to want to do something similar, guys. So I'm just going to copy and paste as I've done in the past. Okay, so operator equals negative, so then we want to take them away. Sorry, operator equals subtraction, take them away, and then we want to do the same type of thing for let's do multiplication. So we want the big cross sign, and then we obviously want to multiply those two together, and if it's none of those, then else it will simply be divide. Okay, so else our result equals, and then we want num1 divided by, okay, and then num2. Okay, so we need to pack these up as a list and return it as a single variable. So the way that we do that is quite simple. Let's put a comment in first. So we'll say return values as a list. We haven't actually calculated all of those values yet, but we will do that on the fly as part of assigning to our list. So return values as a list. Okay, and what we will do is we will say return. Okay, and then we want to define our list, and in our list is going to go the result that we've just calculated, comma, and then we want the rounded version of result. Okay, so that's rounded to 2 decimal places. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to achieve an integer result, but rounded up. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to say I want the integer result of, and then I want my float rounded up. Okay, so that'll be result to 0 decimal places. Okay, so if I didn't return that with the integer cast, it would just give me a 0.0 on the end. So we'll wrap it up and nice and neatly into an integer, but we want to make sure that it is rounded first, so that it rounds up to the nearest integer. So those are our 3 values that we're going to return. Okay, returned as a list, and then obviously when this is passed back to the program, we will unpack it so that we have access to each of those 3 values. So that will do nicely for our subprogram. I don't think I've left anything out of that. Devcat expression. Let's just move that down a little bit. No, I think that's okay. So now we're going to do our main program. So let's put across the screen divider, so main prog. Okay, good. And then we're going to want to get a single line input from the user. So let's say get user input as single line. So this will be a string. It'll be one string which the user provides, and then we need to manage the string to split it up into individual components. So get user input as a single line. So that will be list input, we'll say, equals, and then we just want input because it's a string, and we will say, what should we say? Let's say please input a sum, like, for example, 12.5. I'll use the big multiplication so that the user can see in the prompt what they need to use for that particular symbol or operator. Let's say 3.4. On a single line, and then we'll say with spaces. Okay, I think that will do. Now what we want to do is we want to take the single string and we want to split that single string into our 3 components, so the number followed by the operator followed by the number. Okay, so you should have seen this in a previous video or in class if we've done lists, where essentially we are converting a string to a list type. Okay, so what we will call this is, we'll say this is split input, because that's what we're doing. It's a split input example, and that will be our original input, which is list input dot. So this is a Python dot function format, and it's the split function that we're using. So we want split, and then it's just going to be close brackets and open brackets, guys, because the default is spaces, so we don't need to put anything else in there. Okay, so what do we need to do now? We need to call calculator. So let's call calculator function. Oops. Okay, so we need to assign a variable, really, because it's a function. So let's do final result equals, and then quite simply the name of our subprogram, and then we need to pass into that our split results, which is our list, essentially list of individual elements. Okay, so in there goes split input. Okay, and when we get the result back, final result will be a list with 3 values in, so we need to unpack that list so that we've got access to those 3 values in the list. So our 3 individual variables will be, let's call it calculation, so that's our original calculation, and then let's call the other one rounded, because that's what it is, rounded to 2 decimal places, and the other one we will call int value, or just int val will do, I think. And those 3 equate to the contents of final result. Okay, and then we want to print out, I think. So let's say print to screen. Now I'm going to do this as 3 separate lines, because otherwise it'll go right across the screen and it'll be really difficult to read. So we'll do our print as 3 different lines. So let's do print to screen, and we will do let's say print, let's print to a new line. So we want /n, and then we'll say plus, and then we want our list input. Okay, so we don't want that there because it's concatenation, so we want plus concatenation, no, that's it, and then we want list input, because this is our original, we're actually printing out the original user input. Okay, so we want list input, which is our original input, and then we want concatenated with, and then we want to say equals as the back end of our sum, and then we're going to want to concatenate that with the string casted version of calculation. All right, because that's our original calculation. Excuse me, guys. Then let's print out the rounded version, so it'll be something similar. Okay, so let's say rounded gives, and then we want to concatenate with the string version of the second variable, which is rounded. Oops, not that, rounded. And then finally the integer version, or the whole number version. So we will say to the nearest whole number gives, and then we want to concatenate that with the cast version to a string of, and our final value was int val, so let's put in there int val. Okay, does that look like it's going to work? Print /n. I'm going to keep these packed together, so I'm not going to put /n characters in there, because I want those packed together as a single output, really. So that will be fine, and everything else looks cool. Okay, so let's run the input, see what we get. Run, and let's move this over. So please input a sum like 12 on a single line. Yep, so that makes sense. Let's put in something which I think will be useful just to test all 3 values. So I will put in 11.1132 space divided by space 2. So that's our sum, and that gives us 11.1132 divided by 2 gives, so the original is 5.5566. Rounded gives us 5.56, so that's rounded up to 2dp, and rounded up to the nearest whole number, or just rounded to the nearest whole number really, gives 6. So I've just got this weird little bit here, so I've obviously put a space in my format, my print statement, too many, so it should be 2. Yeah, so that needs to be at the beginning there. Okay, so that seems to work fine. So let's try this again with something else. So obviously sometimes the last two calculations are not going to have too much significance. So if I did 12 plus 4, okay, for example, 12 plus 4 is 16. Okay, so not too much difference between all of those, obviously, guys. Okay, but the more complex numbers and the more complex the expression is, and particularly with division, we're likely to get a difference with those three calculations. So let's try another one. Let's do 12.778 multiplied by, so we want big cross, and then we want 3.45. Okay, oh, that's a nice one. So 44.08, and then a long number of decimal places. Rounded gives 44.08, and the nearest whole number is 44. So that looks quite good. Have I put anything in here to cater for -1? Doesn't look like I have. That was a bit amiss of me, so we need to put that in, don't we? So let's put in some condition and selection to cater for that. So guys, where do you think I should cater for a return value of -1 to indicate an error with user input? So if we go back to the top, we can see that. Let me just scroll down. Essentially what we do is we pick up straight away, we test straight away whether we have an invalid input, and straight away we return -1. So there's no putting together a list here, it just returns a single value. So that needs to be part of the thinking at the point where we pick up and cater for an error in our main code. So what we should do is to pop it here, because we can cater for an invalid input without having to go to the point where we're looking to split the list into 3, because we won't have 3 individual components of a list. So we should do that here really. So let me just move all this up a little bit, because we're going to have to concatenate, not concatenate, we're going to have to indent to move that over. So we will say if final result equates to -1. Let me just put on here test for error. Okay, so if that equates to -1, we want to say a simple print error message. So error with input of operators. Okay, and that's all we need to do, and then everything else needs to be part of the else. Okay, so we want else there, and then we need to indent this. So I'm just going to use my tab key to indent the whole block of code. There we go. And I think if I just put in the unpack results, okay, and print screen, I think that will do the trick. So let's do a test where we're testing for erroneous input. Okay, so let's run this. So this time I'm going to make a deliberate mistake by putting in an operator that's not an operator. So let's put in 12, and let's do something daft. Well, it's not really daft. Well, it is daft. And then let's put in something less daft. And it says error with input operators. So that works fine too. So that's our code solution done, guys. And just to wrap up, well, not just to wrap up, just to summarize what we were doing with lists here. I'm going to put up a slide on the screen now, okay, just to show you what we were doing with packing up and unpacking a list. Okay, so pause the video if you wish. So essentially the program works like this. We take a single string from the user and we use the Python split to split those into individual components, which are string types, and then wrap those up into a list as individual elements of a list. We then pass the entire list across to our program, to our function. When we get that, we then need to unpack the list so that we can work with the number, the operator, and the number, and do the maths that we need to do. What we then do is we take the result and the other calculations that we want to pass back, we wrap those up into a list, and we pass the whole list back to the main program when we receive the list back in the main program. If it's not a -1, then we can unpack the list and we get our 3 values to work with. Okay, so do pause the video and study the slide if you feel that you need to do that. So that's the end of this particular demo. What I'm going to do, guys, is I'm just going to quickly put up some other examples of how you might want to work with lists. I won't type them up manually because you've seen me do that, and hopefully you've had a chance to work through that yourself with me on Python idle maybe. But I just want to give you some other examples of how you can use, for example, iteration to go through a list, either as a return or in a subprogram in its own right. I will see you in a second in a new demo. So guys, in this demo I put together a very quick program which includes a function which will convert centigrade to Fahrenheit. So I've called that the converter, and our main program asks the user to type in a single string input of centigrade temperatures separated by commas, and the idea is then to pass back a list of all of those temperatures converted into Fahrenheit. So let's run the program so I can show you how this works. So if I just move that over, so it says please input a list of centigrade temperatures separated by commas. So let's do that. Let's put in 12, 40, 23, 10, 19. And let's look at the output as a result of the calculations. We'll go through this step by step, and then I'll show you the code. So this is our original input from the user. Okay, so this is a single string on a single line of input, as you can see here. Okay, and this is the list that then gets passed to our converter function. So that's each of these individual characters included in our single string, split out and then put into or packed up into a list, which is here. So that is the value of the parameter and the value that's passed across to the converter function. What the function then does is it loops through the list, converts the temperatures to Fahrenheit, packs them back up into a list, and then sends it back to the main program. So this is the list that gets passed back to the main program in Fahrenheit. So these are the Fahrenheit equivalents. And then, of course, once we've got that list, if we wanted to, we could then iterate through that and deal with each of our individual values in turn. So we could do whatever we wanted to do with those, convert them, cast them to floats and calculate an average, for example, or whatever we wanted to do next in the program. So let me show you how this works very briefly. Let's get rid of the boxes and let's move this out of the way. Okay, so let's go through our subroutine subprogram first, guys, which is up the top here. So if I just zoom in. So we start off, of course, as usual, with the name of our function and the input parameter, which is temp list. So that's the split list of centigrade temperatures passed across from the user. We initialize an empty list of 0 size, and then what we're doing here is we're using a traditional Python for loop to iterate through the list. And the list is sequential, which means we can access each item by virtue of its index value in the list. Okay, so what we need to do first of all is, if we assign to a variable, okay, the value of the temperature at each index in that list, what we then need to do, of course, is to convert it to an integer, because at the moment it is a list of string values. Okay, so we assign to a variable the integer version of each of the temperatures at that point in the list, of that index. Okay, then we do the normal calculation to convert centigrade into Fahrenheit, which is here. So temp F is reassigned with the Fahrenheit version, and then of course we need to pack that up into a list by appending each item to our empty list, which we do here. Okay, and we iterate through to build and populate our list, and once that's done, of course, then we return the list of Fahrenheit temperatures back to the main program. So let's go back to the main program, if we can scroll down. Okay, so obviously this is the little bit here where we are getting the input from the user. Here we have the part of the program where we take the string and we split that into individual items into a list, which is what we do there. Okay, and then we had that statement that says print the list to pass to the function. So that's what we've done there, and that appears just here, guys. Okay, so that's where we get our first printout, the original list and the original input and the list that was created to pass through to our converter function. And then what we have is the results of passing, the results that are passed back to our main program is here. So results equals temp converter, okay, passing in the list as our input parameter. Here's our print statement, the list passed back, and then we have string of the results. So that just gives us our list, and our list that we got back is just here. Okay, so that's the list that we got back. And then what we can then do is we can not unpack. Okay, that's the wrong term. We're not unpacking, we are iterating through. Okay, and we are identifying each value in the list. Okay, so let's move that across. We could unpack that, of course, but the problem is we don't necessarily know how many items there are in the list, and it's simply easier for us to iterate through those under these circumstances because they are all related values. So an iteration is just fine. So to iterate, guys, what we've done is we've used a Python collection iteration format, which is here. Very simple. For temp in results, simply print out temp. Okay, and that gives us our list down the screen like that. Okay, so I ran through that quite quickly, guys. Do pause the video, do rerun and pause the video in places if you want to go through that again. I will provide this and the previous demo that we did as well. I will provide that in the Schoology folder in the code section for this particular video. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video, guys. I hope that you have found it useful, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.